The encounter. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Greenfield Park, a scenic space in a town small enough that people generally recognized each other on the street. Families filled the park as laughter and children's excited shouts echoed from the playground. Nestled on a park bench near the lake, surrounded by scattered golden leaves, Darren sat watching his daughter, Lily, swing joyfully. As he pushed her on the swing, her small blonde curls bounced with each rise and fall, and she giggled with that uninhibited delight only young children can muster. Darren couldn't help but smile every time she squealed, "Hired, Daddy, higher." His life had changed entirely since becoming Lily's father, and he savored every second of it. This life, his family, was something he'd fought hard to build and maintain. But the perfection of the moment was interrupted when Darren noticed someone watching them intently from a distance, a woman with a stiff posture and a suspicious look that seemed too focused on him and Lily. The woman, Tricia Morgan, had been strolling through the park with a tightly gripped tote bag and a purse slung over her shoulder. When she caught sight of Darren with Lily, her heart began to race. Her mind instantly flooded with assumptions, ignited by seeing a black man with a white child in a quiet suburban park. She thought of headlines she'd read, stories that had frightened her, and her instincts told her she needed to intervene. Tricia's thoughts spiraled with suspicion as she observed their interactions. She couldn't hear their words, but she didn't need to. In her mind, the scenario seemed crystal clear. A young girl was in danger, and she had to act before it was too late. Before Darren even noticed her approaching, she had already taken her phone out and dialed 911. Her gaze was still fixed on Darren and Lily, watching every move he made. Darren turned and finally saw her standing just a few paces away, her expression a mixture of alarm and accusation. He felt a pang of unease but chose to ignore her, thinking perhaps she would go about her business. But that's when he noticed she was on the phone and pointing at them. Minutes later, the serene park atmosphere shattered with the sound of police sirens. Darren's stomach dropped when he saw 2 patrol cars approaching them, red and blue lights flashing. His heart sank, knowing he hadn't done anything wrong, but uncertain about how the situation might unfold. The officers stepped out and made their way toward him, eyes narrowing with guarded suspicion. Tricia stepped back, her job done, and watched intently as the officers approached Darren. Lily, sensing the tension, clutched her father's hand, her innocent face filled with confusion. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions," one of the officers said firmly. Darren nodded, doing his best to stay calm, but his voice caught in his throat when he responded. "Of course, officer. What seems to be the issue?" The officer glanced at Lily, then back at Darren. "We received a call that raised concerns about your interaction with this young lady here. Can you please explain your relationship with her?" Darren's expression shifted from confusion to frustration, and then to sadness as he knelt down to Lily's level. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, keeping his voice steady. "These officers just want to make sure everything's okay. Can you be a brave girl and tell them who I am?" Lily's tiny hand clung tighter to Darren's. Her voice was quiet but clear. "This is my daddy. He's my best friend, and we're playing at the park. Why are you asking?" The officers exchanged looks, visibly softening, but turned back to Darren. "Sir, do you have any identification that can verify your relationship to the child?" Darren nodded and reached slowly into his pocket, handing over his wallet, his driver's license, and a small worn photo of him and Lily on the day he and his wife adopted her. In the picture, they were all smiles, Darren holding her close with pride in his eyes, as Lily held a tiny "Welcome Home" sign with scribbled letters. The officer looked at the picture, then at Lily, and back to Darren, his expression more understanding now. "Thank you, sir. We apologize for the inconvenience. We received a call from a concerned citizen, but it's clear that there's no issue here." Darren forced a smile, relief mingling with the anger brewing inside. He kept his voice calm but couldn't hide the bitterness. "I understand you're just doing your job, officers, but maybe next time, A bit more understanding of what families look like would save us all from a lot of unnecessary pain." The officers nodded, slightly sheepish, and turned to leave, while Tricia, who had been watching from behind a tree, remained frozen in place. She hadn't anticipated this outcome and felt a wave of shame creeping up her neck. It was a hard blow to her ego, realizing she had jumped to such a hurtful conclusion without even thinking. Just as she was about to turn away, Darren called out, his tone firm yet steady. "Ma'am, would you mind stepping over here?" Tricia turned slowly, her face pale. She hesitated but walked over, knowing she couldn't simply brush this off. When she was close enough to hear him, Darren spoke, his voice both controlled and piercing. "What made you so sure I was a threat to my daughter that you felt the need to call the police?" Tricia opened her mouth, searching for the right words. I just thought. With all that happens in the world, I was concerned for her safety." Darren's gaze held her firmly. "Maybe next time. Consider that not every family looks the same. We love each other just like anyone else. I hope you'll remember that before you put another child and father through this." Tricia nodded, too stunned and embarrassed to respond. She murmured a quiet, "I'm sorry," and hurried away, each step echoing her mistake. Darren watched her leave, then returned to Lily, his heart aching for what his daughter had just been put through. That night, as Darren tucked Lily into bed, he stroked her hair softly and whispered, "No one can ever change what we are, Lily. You and I are family, forever and always." She looked up at him, her tiny hand reaching up to touch his face, and she whispered back, "Forever and always, Daddy." As he closed her door, Darren felt a renewed resolve that no prejudice, no matter how deeply ingrained, would ever define their family. The ripple effect. The incident at Greenfield Park left Darren in a whirlwind of emotions he struggled to contain. His mind was heavy with questions that stayed with him even as he returned to work the next day, trying to focus on the engineering plans scattered across his desk. Every line and calculation reminded him of the precision he loved in his work, a precision so unlike the imprecision of people's judgments. Lunchtime came, and Darren took his break at a small coffee shop around the corner from his office. The place had become a favorite of his, offering a peaceful atmosphere and a view of the bustling town square. Just as he was settling in with his coffee, he heard the bell chime as a familiar figure entered, Tricia, the same woman from the park, looking as tense as he remembered. She noticed him immediately and froze, gripping her purse tightly. Darren watched her hesitation, noticing the flicker of discomfort on her face. She glanced around, clearly debating whether to leave or stay, but eventually decided to walk to the counter to order. Darren looked away, hoping for a quiet lunch, but Tricia made her way toward his table, fidgeting as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind and was second-guessing herself. "Darren, right?" she began, her voice tight. He nodded, bracing himself, unsure of what she might say. Her face softened, and she seemed to struggle with her words. "I wanted to apologize. Again," she said, lowering her voice, "for the way I acted yesterday. I realize now how wrong I was. But I also wanted to ask if we could talk. I want to understand." The sincerity in her voice surprised Darren, and though he felt a pang of resentment, he nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. He wanted to believe that people could change, and this could be a chance to make her see the world differently. She slid into the seat across from him, her fingers fiddling with her coffee cup. "I was raised to believe certain things," she began, avoiding his eyes. "It's hard to explain, but my family, we weren't around people who looked different. And they always made it sound like anyone who wasn't like us was a threat. I guess I never questioned that until, yesterday." Darren listened quietly, his expression neutral. Part of him wanted to dismiss her, to say she should have questioned it sooner, but he held his tongue. "I've been thinking a lot about it since then," Tricia continued, her eyes finally meeting his. "And I realize that maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things. I know it's not much, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry." Darren took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. "It's not easy to confront the things we grew up with," he replied slowly. "But understanding and acceptance are choices we make as adults. I hope you can remember that when you look at other families in the future." Tricia nodded, looking almost relieved, though a shadow of guilt still lingered in her eyes. They talked a little longer, and as she left, Darren could feel a small weight lifting. Maybe, he thought, this conversation could be a step toward change, if only in one person's mind. That evening, Darren returned home, his heart lighter after the unexpected conversation. When he walked through the door, Lily ran up to him, holding a piece of paper covered in crayon-drawn hearts and stick figures of the two of them holding hands. "Look, Daddy, I made this for you," she beamed, handing him her artwork with pride. Darren scooped her up, his voice choked with emotion as he kissed her forehead. "This is the best picture I've ever seen, Lily. I'm going to keep it forever." As he tucked her into bed later, he reflected on the day, holding on to the hope that maybe his conversation with Tricia would plant a seed of change. Little did he know, the encounter at the park would spark a wider reaction than he could have anticipated. By the following week, word of the incident at Greenfield Park had spread through the town, fueled by whispers and retellings from people who had witnessed it or heard about it secondhand. Greenfield was a close-knit community, and stories traveled fast, often taking on a life of their own. At Lily's school, some of the children had heard their parents discussing the man from the park, and though they didn't understand the details, they repeated parts of what they had overheard. Lily started to notice the shift. At recess, some kids who used to play with her now hesitated or looked at her with expressions she couldn't understand. One afternoon, she ran over to her friend Emma, who was playing with a group of children near the jungle gym. Emma glanced at Lily, but then quickly looked away, as if embarrassed. "Hey, Emma," Lily called, but Emma turned to the others and whispered something before they all ran off, leaving Lily standing alone, confused and hurt. Lily's teacher, Mrs. Simmons, a warm and perceptive woman in her early 40s, had noticed the change in behavior toward Lily. She approached her gently, kneeling down to Lily's level. "Are you okay, Lily?" Mrs. Simmons asked softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Lily nodded, though her eyes betrayed her sadness. I don't know why they're being mean," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Simmons's heart ached for the young girl. She knew that children often reflected the biases of the adults around them, whether knowingly or not. She made a mental note to address it in the classroom in a way that might help the children understand that families could look different but share the same love. Meanwhile, Darren was also feeling the repercussions. At work, he began noticing the sidelong glances and the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered the room. He could feel the weight of judgment from those who had heard the story but didn't understand the full context. The whispers, the assumptions, they gnawed at him. One afternoon, during a team meeting, he noticed that Tom, a coworker he'd been friends with for years, was avoiding eye contact. They had shared countless coffee breaks, talking about everything from work deadlines to parenting challenges. But now, Tom's reluctance to even look at him was painfully obvious. During a break, Darren decided to confront it head-on. "Hey, Tom," he began, keeping his tone light. "It seems like something's on your mind. Did I miss something?" Tom hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "It's not you, Darren," he replied with a forced chuckle. "It's just, well, you know how people talk." Darren pressed him gently, hoping to clear the air. "Yeah, people do talk, but I'd rather hear things from you than from anyone else." Tom sighed, finally looking him in the eye. "I heard about what happened at the park, about someone calling the cops on you and, well, I don't know. People were saying maybe it's just, I don't know, different." Darren clenched his jaw, willing himself to stay calm. "Different, huh?" he replied, keeping his voice steady. "Tom, if you'd been there, you would have seen a dad enjoying a day at the park with his daughter. Nothing more." Tom nodded, his face softening slightly. "You're right. It was probably blown way out of proportion. Sorry, man. I shouldn't have let the rumors cloud things." "Thanks for saying that," Darren said, giving him a firm pat on the shoulder. "But just remember, families don't always look the same, and that doesn't make them any less of a family." As he walked away, Darren felt a renewed sense of determination. He wouldn't let this incident define him or his family. But he knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, especially as long-held prejudices continued to surface in unexpected ways. Back at home, Darren and his wife, Maya, sat together at the kitchen table, a stack of bills between them. But neither seemed focused on the numbers. Maya glanced at Darren, concern etched in her expression. She had been struggling with her own feelings about the situation, watching the effects it was having on her husband and their daughter. "I know we can't control what people think," she said softly, "but I hate seeing you go through this." Darren reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I know, Maya. It's been hard, but I'm not going to let them tear us down. We've come too far for that." Maya nodded, though the worry didn't leave her face. "I've been thinking about Lily, too. She's going to need support, especially if the kids at school start treating her differently. We need to find a way to explain things to her, to prepare her for the questions she might face." They talked late into the night, strategizing how to protect Lily from the small-town gossip and the sideways glances. They wanted her to grow up knowing that love, family, and respect transcended appearances. But unbeknownst to them, Tricia was grappling with her own internal conflict, haunted by Darren's words at the coffee shop. She replayed their conversation in her mind over and over, realizing that her actions had ignited a wave of tension within the community. She was starting to see how her assumption and her call to the police had stirred a latent prejudice in the town, a prejudice she'd never fully confronted in herself. The following day, Tricia made a bold decision. She contacted a local community group focused on fostering understanding and inclusivity and arranged to host a town meeting, hoping to address the biases and misunderstandings that had been quietly festering in Greenfield. The news of the meeting spread, and by the time the day arrived, the small community center was filled with curious faces. Darren and Maya, hearing about the meeting, decided to attend, uncertain of what might happen but determined to see it through. As Tricia stood before the gathered crowd, she took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces. Darren was there, his expression unreadable, but his presence was enough to keep her grounded. She began speaking, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength. "I'm here to admit I was wrong," she said, her words reverberating through the room. "My assumptions about others nearly tore our family apart. But in the days since, I've started to realize that it's not just me. Our community needs to address the judgments we hold." The crowd was silent, listening intently as Tricia continued, opening up about her upbringing and the beliefs she was now working to unlearn. Darren felt a strange mixture of pride and relief as he listened. This wasn't the solution to everything, he knew, but it was a start, a step toward healing not just for his family, but for the community as a whole. The community's reckoning. The town meeting lingered in everyone's thoughts for days afterward, sparking conversations in unexpected places. Greenfield was changing, and though the transformation was subtle, it was unmistakable. Darren, Maya, and their daughter Lily went on with their daily routines, hoping the ripple effect would die down. But it was clear that the town had entered a period of introspection, and that they were at its center. Meanwhile, Tricia, grappling with newfound self-awareness, found herself questioning more than just her actions that day in the park. The meeting had opened her eyes to a world beyond her limited experiences, but it had also unveiled a harsher truth, that her biases were mirrored by many in the town. She began volunteering at the community group she had reached out to for the meeting, hoping to make a real change, starting with herself. One afternoon, while sorting donations at the community center, she ran into Carla Espinoza, a woman she had known casually from the town's PTA. "Carla, a single mother with 2 teenage sons, was one of the few residents of Greenfield who had faced subtle discrimination over the years. Her family had moved to Greenfield from a large city hoping for a quieter, more welcoming life. But the whispers and silent judgments had begun soon after they arrived, despite Carla's active involvement in the community. "Hey, Tricia," Carla greeted, her expression warm yet cautious. "Hi, Carla." Tricia smiled back, though it was tinged with hesitation. She had seen Carla at the meeting, watching her with an unreadable expression. It was a look Tricia couldn't forget. As they worked side by side, a thoughtful silence settled between them before Carla finally spoke. "I was surprised to see you at the meeting, Tricia, and to hear you say all those things." Tricia looked down, fumbling with a box of canned goods, her voice quiet but determined. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Carla, and I'm realizing that one day of self-awareness isn't enough to fix them." Carla nodded, her gaze softening. "The first step is recognizing it. But you know," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "there are many in Greenfield who might not want change. Some people like things the way they are." Tricia swallowed, feeling the weight of Carla's words. "I know," she admitted, "but I'm not going back. I can't unsee it now. I've hurt people like Darren and his daughter, and I want to be better." Carla's eyes lingered on Tricia, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. After a moment, she smiled. "Well, I'll help if I can. Just know it won't be easy." The 2 women continued their work in companionable silence, each lost in thought. They both knew that the real challenge lay ahead. Change, after all, wasn't just a decision. It was a commitment. While Tricia and Carla worked to shift the community's attitudes, Darren and Maya continued facing challenges of their own. Darren had begun receiving messages of support from people around town, but there were also those who resented the changes his story had prompted. Some voiced their opinions openly, muttering under their breath as he walked past, while others masked their hostility with thinly veiled comments. At Lily's school, Mrs. Simmons, her teacher, had noticed the increased tension and wanted to address it. She invited Darren and Maya to discuss an idea she had to support Lily and other students who might be feeling isolated. "Thank you for coming in," Mrs. Simmons began, offering them seats in her cozy classroom. "I wanted to talk to you about Lily and the social dynamics I've noticed lately. Some of the children, I think, may be hearing things at home that make them view Lily differently." Darren and Maya exchanged glances, their faces etched with concern. Mrs. Simmons continued, "I've seen this before, especially in small towns. But rather than simply telling the children how to behave, I want to help them understand. I'm planning a Families Around the World week where the children can learn about different cultures and family structures. I believe this might help them see beyond their own experiences and understand that families come in all shapes and colors." Maya's face softened with gratitude. "That sounds wonderful. Lily would love it." Darren nodded, his voice filled with appreciation. "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. It means a lot that you're willing to do this. It feels like a positive step." Mrs. Simmons smiled, her eyes bright with determination. "Every child deserves to feel safe and accepted here. I'll be reaching out to parents to make sure they're aware of the program, and I hope it'll plant seeds of understanding that go beyond the classroom." As they left the school, Darren and Maya felt a glimmer of hope, reassured that they had allies in the community who cared about the future of Greenfield as much as they did. But they also knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, and they prepared themselves for the conversations that might follow. The following Monday, Families Around the World Week kicked off, with decorations filling the hallways, showcasing photos, flags, and facts about various cultures. Mrs. Simmons introduced the theme to her class with a large map and invited the children to share stories about their own families. Lily was shy at first, unsure of how her family might be received. But when Mrs. Simmons showed the class a picture of her and Darren together, Lily felt a surge of pride. Mrs. Simmons spoke with warmth and affection, explaining that families were made up of people who loved and supported each other, regardless of how they looked. Slowly, the other children began sharing their own stories, and some of the assumptions they held began to melt away. By the end of the week, Lily felt more at ease, her classmates no longer looking at her with the same curiosity or distance. One afternoon, as she was leaving class, Emma, the friend who had once run away, approached her. "Hey, Lily," she murmured, shuffling her feet nervously. I didn't understand before, but my mom says families can look different and still be the same. I'm sorry if I was mean." Lily looked at her friend and gave her a small smile. "It's okay, Emma. My daddy says sometimes people just need time to learn." The two girls hugged, the simple gesture bringing a new warmth to the classroom that had once felt divided. While Mrs. Simmons's project worked its magic with the children, Tricia and Carla continued their work at the community center. They organized a series of talks on inclusivity, inviting local residents to share stories and engage in open dialogue. Darren and Maya were invited to participate, and they agreed, hoping their experiences could foster understanding. On the night of the first event, the community center filled with familiar faces, all curious but cautious. As Darren and Maya took their seats at the front of the room, they felt the weight of the community's expectations, knowing that their story had sparked a reckoning that wouldn't be easy to resolve. Tricia introduced them, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Tonight, we're here to listen, to learn, and to grow. Darren and Maya have graciously agreed to share their experiences with us, and I hope we can all approach this with open hearts and minds." Darren spoke first, sharing the story of his life, the struggles he had faced growing up as a black man in a predominantly white town, and the challenges he encountered when he married Maya and adopted Lily. He spoke candidly about the assumptions people made, the judgments they faced, and how it felt to be seen as different in a town that prided itself on unity. Maya followed, her voice filled with both strength and vulnerability. She talked about their decision to raise Lily in Greenfield, hoping that she could grow up surrounded by acceptance and love. But she also acknowledged the pain of seeing their daughter face the same challenges they had and how it felt to worry about her future. The audience listened in silence, their expressions a mix of empathy, discomfort, and reflection. Tricia watched from the back, feeling a strange sense of relief. She had feared that Darren's story would expose her to judgment, but instead, she found herself inspired by his resilience and his willingness to share. After Darren and Maya finished speaking, the floor was open for questions. A woman in the audience raised her hand, her voice wavering. "I've lived here my whole life, and I thought I knew everyone, but I see now that I was wrong. Thank you for sharing your story. It makes me realize I've never really tried to understand what life is like for people who aren't like me." Others echoed similar sentiments, sharing their own realizations and pledges to change. One by one, the residents of Greenfield began confronting their own biases, recognizing that prejudice wasn't just a problem of the past, but a reality they still had to confront. Tricia listened with a swelling heart, her fears and regrets mingling with hope for the future. As the event came to a close, she approached Darren and Maya, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, both of you, for giving me a chance to make things right," she said softly. "I know I have a long way to go, but I want you to know I'm committed to doing better." Darren smiled, reaching out to shake her hand. "Thank you, Tricia. It takes courage to face the things we'd rather ignore. And remember, change is a journey. It's okay to take it one step at a time." In the days that followed, Greenfield continued its path toward healing. Conversations that once would have been met with defensiveness now sparked curiosity. The town, once divided by assumptions and unspoken prejudice, was beginning to understand the strength that came from unity. Darren and Maya felt the shift in their daily lives, noticing fewer stares and more smiles as they walked through town. At school, Lily's friendships blossomed, free from the weight of judgment. And at work, Darren found his relationships with his colleagues evolving, strengthened by the honesty that had emerged from the incident. Greenfield had a long way to go, but Darren knew that change had taken root, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at home. The journey to acceptance. The following weeks passed slowly, each day revealing more shifts in Greenfield than Darren could have imagined possible. His and Maya's story had rippled through the town, touching people in ways they hadn't anticipated. But while many residents had taken steps toward understanding, there remained an undercurrent of resistance among some. The reality was that not everyone in Greenfield was willing to confront their own biases. One of those people was Owen, an older man who had been a fixture in the community for decades. Known for his unwavering opinions and fierce loyalty to tradition, he was not someone people dared to challenge often. He had grown up in Greenfield, watching it evolve from a sleepy, homogeneous town to one that was beginning to diversify. And to him, this change felt like an erosion of everything he held dear. To Owen, differences were threats, and people who didn't look or live like him were strangers intruding on his world. At the town's weekly market, Owen saw Darren and Maya browsing through the stalls with Lily. He made no attempt to hide his disapproval, muttering loudly to his friend, "It's a shame what's happening to our town. We used to have standards. People respected tradition. Now, it's all diversity this and acceptance that." His friend nodded in agreement, casting a side glance at Darren. Darren overheard the comment, but he chose to ignore it, pulling Lily closer to him as they walked by. He'd heard enough from people like Owen to know that engaging would only give them fuel. But as he tried to shield Lily from the whispers, he couldn't help but feel the sting of their words. Owen's words didn't go unnoticed by everyone, though. Tricia, who was helping at a stall nearby, had also heard him, and something inside her snapped. She had been on a journey of self-discovery, pushing herself to confront her own biases, and it angered her to see someone clinging so stubbornly to hate. She felt a responsibility to say something, to challenge the way things had always been done in Greenfield. Tricia took a deep breath, steeling herself, and walked over to Owen. "Owen," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I think it's time you realize that Greenfield isn't changing for the worse. It's growing, and part of that growth is learning to accept people who might be different from us." Owen scowled, surprised that Tricia, a woman he had always seen as an ally, was challenging him. "Is that so?" he retorted, his voice dripping with disdain. "I thought you were one of us, Tricia. Don't tell me you're buying into this nonsense." Tricia held her ground, feeling the weight of her words. "I used to think like you, Owen, but then I realized that I was just holding on to fear. Fear of change, fear of people I didn't understand. And that fear was hurting people like Darren and his family. They deserve to feel safe here, just like we do." Owen stared at her, his expression unreadable, before he turned away without another word. Tricia watched him leave, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and resolve. She knew she couldn't change everyone's mind, but standing up to Owen felt like an important step. Meanwhile, Darren and Maya continued to navigate the complex dynamics of Greenfield, determined to stay resilient in the face of adversity. At home, they talked openly with Lily about their experiences, trying to prepare her for the complexities of life in a world that wasn't always kind. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Lily spoke up, her voice small but steady. "Daddy, why do some people not like us?" Darren exchanged a glance with Maya, his heart heavy at having to explain such a harsh truth to someone so young. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, Lily, people are scared of things they don't understand. When they see something that's different from what they're used to, they don't know how to react. But that doesn't mean we're wrong or that we don't belong." Lily nodded thoughtfully, her face scrunched up in concentration. "So, we just have to be kind even if they're not." Maya smiled, reaching out to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Yes, sweetheart. It's not always easy, but being kind is the best thing we can do. We want to show people that our family is strong and loving, no matter what anyone else thinks." The conversation left Darren and Maya with a renewed sense of purpose. They realized that, more than anything, they wanted Lily to grow up with the confidence to be proud of who she was and where she came from. They wanted her to understand that acceptance began within, and that their family was a source of strength she could always rely on. Around town, Greenfield's journey to inclusivity continued, spearheaded by the efforts of people like Mrs. Simmons, Carla, and Tricia, who had organized another event at the community center. This time, it was a community potluck and story circle, an evening where residents were encouraged to bring dishes that represented their backgrounds and share personal stories. Tricia had made a point of inviting Darren, Maya, and Lily, hoping that sharing a meal together would create an atmosphere of unity and understanding. On the night of the potluck, the community center was alive with activity. Tables were lined with dishes from every culture imaginable: samosas, tamales, homemade pasta, and even a few family recipes from Greenfield's oldest residents. The smell of spices and baked goods filled the air, blending with the laughter and chatter of people from all walks of life. As Darren and his family arrived, they were met with smiles and greetings from people they had barely spoken to before. Darren felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He could sense a genuine shift in the atmosphere. People were no longer looking at him and his family as outsiders. They were beginning to see them as part of Greenfield. Tricia spotted them and came over, her face lighting up with a smile. "Darren, Maya, I'm so glad you could make it." Maya returned her smile, a warmth in her eyes. "Thank you for inviting us, Tricia. It's a beautiful event." As the evening unfolded, everyone gathered in a large circle, each person sharing a story or memory that held special meaning for them. When it was Darren's turn, he spoke about his childhood, the challenges he had faced, and the resilience that had brought him to where he was now. His words were met with a respectful silence, followed by murmurs of appreciation. Then it was Maya's turn. She shared a story about her grandmother, a woman of strength and wisdom who had taught her the importance of love and family. As she spoke, Darren held her hand, feeling the power of her words. When it was Lily's turn, she surprised everyone by standing up, her small voice carrying through the room. "I love my mommy and daddy. They always tell me that family means loving each other, no matter what." Her innocent words brought smiles and a few teary eyes, capturing the essence of what the evening was truly about. After the stories, the potluck continued, with people mingling and sharing food. Darren found himself in conversation with Mr. Hill, the owner of the local hardware store, who had been a friend of Owen's for years. Though he had never been openly hostile, Mr. Hill had always kept his distance, a silent observer in the community. Mr. Hill cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Darren, I have to say, I never thought much about what it must be like to live in a place where people judge you for things that don't matter. I guess I was just used to things being a certain way." Darren nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand, Mr. Hill. Change isn't easy. But all I want is for my family to feel safe and welcome here. That's all anyone wants, really." Mr. Hill offered a hesitant smile, nodding. "You're right. I think I could stand to learn a thing or two about what it means to welcome others." He extended his hand, and Darren shook it, a quiet gesture of acceptance that spoke volumes. By the end of the night, Darren and Maya felt a deeper connection to Greenfield than ever before. They could see that the town's walls were beginning to break down, replaced by bridges of empathy and understanding. But they knew there would still be challenges ahead. Owen and others like him hadn't changed their views, and Darren knew that there would always be people resistant to the new Greenfield. A few days later, Darren received an invitation to speak at Greenfield's annual town hall meeting, an event where residents gathered to discuss issues affecting the community. The invitation came as a surprise, and he knew that speaking at the town hall would place him directly in the spotlight, facing both allies and critics. After much thought, he accepted the invitation, realizing that it was an opportunity to speak openly, to continue advocating for inclusivity, and to strengthen the relationships that had begun forming in Greenfield. On the night of the town hall, Darren stood at the podium, his heart racing as he looked out over the crowd. He spotted familiar faces: Tricia, Carla, Mrs. Simmons, and Maya and Lily, sitting near the front with expressions of unwavering support. Owen was there too, his arms crossed and his face set in a skeptical frown. Darren took a deep breath and began speaking. When my family and I first came to Greenfield, we wanted to be part of a community that values each of its members, no matter where they come from or what they look like. We wanted a place where our daughter could grow up feeling safe, accepted, and proud of who she is. He continued, sharing the struggles they had faced, the pain of being judged, and the small victories that had shown them Greenfield's potential for change. As he spoke, he felt the tension in the room slowly dissolve, replaced by a collective sense of understanding. Greenfield is a beautiful place, Darren concluded, his voice strong. And it can be even more beautiful if we all work together to make it a home for everyone. Acceptance isn't about changing who we are. It's about expanding who we welcome. The room erupted in applause, with people rising to their feet, their faces filled with emotion. Even Owen, though he didn't clap, wore an expression of grudging respect. Darren stepped down from the podium, his heart full, as Maya and Lily joined him, wrapping him in a tight embrace. In the days that followed, Greenfield continued its journey toward unity. The changes were subtle but profound, with more people willing to listen, to question their assumptions, and to reach across the divides that had once seemed insurmountable. And though Darren knew that the road to acceptance was long, he also knew that Greenfield was on the right path. It was becoming a place where families like his could thrive. A town where love and acceptance could overcome even the deepest-seated prejudices. The challenge of change. Weeks after Darren's speech at the town hall, Greenfield continued to show signs of transformation. But with change came resistance. Darren and Maya felt the weight of that tension every day, a constant reminder that not everyone embraced the town's progress toward acceptance. Meanwhile, Lily was flourishing in her own way. The families around the world, week at her school, had left a lasting impression, helping her feel more comfortable in her skin and confident in her family's uniqueness. However, while she felt freer at school, Darren and Maya noticed a change in her behavior when they went into town. She clung to them a little tighter, glancing around as if anticipating the same hostility she had once seen in the park. One Saturday morning, as they strolled through the town square, Darren noticed Lily's unease as she looked up at the people around them. He knelt down beside her, his hand resting on her small shoulder. "Lily, what's on your mind?" he asked gently. She hesitated, looking down at her shoes. "Are people still mad at us, Daddy?" Darren's heart ached at her question, and he took a deep breath before answering. "No, sweetheart. Not everyone understands yet, but many people have learned that our family is just as important as any other." Lily's face softened, though her small brow remained furrowed. "So, they'll be nice now." Maya stepped in, kneeling beside her. "Some people still need more time to understand, but we have a lot of friends now who are helping everyone see that we all belong here. Remember, change takes time, but you have your mommy and daddy with you every step of the way." Lily nodded, her expression brightening as they continued walking together. But Darren knew that her question had highlighted the very core of their journey. Change was slow, and even small steps could leave lasting impressions, especially on a child. At the same time, Tricia was facing her own battles as she pushed forward in her efforts for inclusivity. Her decision to support Darren and Maya had cost her friendships with some of the more resistant residents, people who had once viewed her as an ally in keeping Greenfield traditional. Yet with every step away from them, she felt more certain of her decision to align herself with the community's new direction. One of her most vocal critics was, unsurprisingly, Owen. He continued to resist, vocalizing his displeasure at town events and spreading his views among anyone who would listen. His influence was strong among some of the older residents, and his arguments often held weight with those who shared his beliefs. But despite the discomfort of their interactions, Tricia refused to let him go unchallenged. One afternoon, as she volunteered at the community center, she encountered Owen, who had reluctantly joined a cleanup event. As they worked alongside each other, he grumbled under his breath, making no effort to hide his frustration. "You know, Tricia," he said, his voice thick with irritation, "I don't see why you're so set on changing things that don't need fixing. Greenfield was fine the way it was." Tricia paused, gripping her broom tightly. She looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Was it really fine, Owen?" she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "Or was it just comfortable for people like you? Because there are people in this town who never felt included, families who deserve to feel just as safe and welcome here as you do." Owen scoffed, dismissing her words. "So, what? We have to change everything just to please a few people?" Tricia shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't about pleasing people, Owen. It's about doing what's right. And if you can't see that, maybe it's time you question why." Owen fell silent, his face hardening as he turned away, refusing to respond. But Tricia didn't waver, and as he walked away, she knew she'd planted a seed, one that might take time to grow, but one she hoped would make him think. As winter approached, the air in Greenfield grew colder, and with it, the simmering tension among some of the residents who still struggled to embrace change. The community center decided to organize a winter holiday fair, hoping to foster unity and joy as the town prepared for the season. The event would feature food, games, and booths from local businesses, with the proceeds supporting the community center's programs. Tricia, Carla, and Mrs. Simmons have been key organizers of the fair, carefully planning it to reflect the diversity that was becoming a part of Greenfield's identity. Maya volunteered to help with decorations, bringing along Lily, who was thrilled at the chance to add her creative touch. Darren offered to help set up booths, determined to contribute in whatever way he could to strengthen the community's growing bond. The day of the fair arrived, and Greenfield's town square came alive with twinkling lights, festive music, and a palpable excitement in the air. Children ran from booth to booth, their laughter mixing with the sounds of holiday bells and cheerful chatter. Darren, helping at a booth selling hot cocoa, looked out over the crowd, marveling at the sight. For the first time since the incident at the park, he felt a true sense of peace and belonging. Greenfield, with all its flaws and resistance, was beginning to feel like home. But not everyone felt the same way. Owen had grudgingly attended the fair, still unhappy with the direction the town had taken. As he wandered through the booths, he caught sight of Darren and Maya, chatting and laughing with their neighbors, their ease and confidence a stark contrast to the isolation he felt. It unsettled him, this realization that Greenfield was changing in ways he couldn't control. Unable to keep his thoughts to himself, Owen approached Darren, his face set in a mixture of frustration and confusion. "You know, I remember a time when Greenfield didn't have to put on a show just to make people feel like they belonged." Darren looked at Owen, choosing his words carefully. "And maybe that's the problem, Owen. It's not about putting on a show. It's about making sure everyone feels like they're part of this community." Owen scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't see why it has to be this way." Darren's voice was calm but firm. "Maybe it's time you ask yourself why it bothers you so much to see other people happy. This town is big enough for all of us, and nobody's trying to take anything away from you." For a moment, Owen looked as though he might argue, but something in Darren's words seemed to strike a chord. He fell silent, and for the first time, his expression softened, if only slightly. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Darren with a faint sense of hope that perhaps even Owen could change. As the fair continued, Maya and Lily explored the booths, stopping at one that sold handmade ornaments. Lily's eyes sparkled with delight as she picked up an ornament shaped like a snowflake, its delicate edges glistening in the soft light. "Can we get this one, Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. Maya smiled, reaching for her wallet. "Of course, sweetheart. It'll be a beautiful addition to our tree." Just as they finished their purchase, they ran into Mrs. Simmons, who had been watching them with a warm smile. "Lily, you did a wonderful job decorating the classroom last week," she said. "Your snowflakes were the best ones." Lily beamed, her pride evident. "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. I made them all sparkly so they'd look just like the real ones." The interaction filled Maya with gratitude. Mrs. Simmons had been one of the town's most consistent allies, and her support had made a world of difference to their family. They chatted for a few minutes, exchanging warm words and laughter, before Mrs. Simmons excused herself to help with the next booth. As Maya and Lily continued walking, they felt a renewed sense of connection to Greenfield, a town that had begun to embrace their family in ways they had never expected. They knew it hadn't been easy, and that there were still people who clung to old prejudices, but they felt encouraged by the changes they had seen. That evening, as they returned home, Darren and Maya reflected on the fair and the experiences that had brought them closer to the town. They knew they had come a long way, but they also understood that the journey was far from over. Change, they realized, was a continuous process, one that required patience, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the power of love and acceptance. As they tucked Lily into bed, she held the snowflake ornament tightly, her eyes shining with excitement. "We're going to have the best Christmas ever, aren't we?" Maya smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "Yes, we are. And do you know why? Because we're together, and that's what matters most." Darren knelt beside her, his hand resting on hers. "And remember, no matter what happens, our family will always be strong. We're proud of who we are, and we're lucky to have each other." Lily nodded, her face lighting up with a smile. "Forever and always, right, Daddy?" Darren's voice softened, filled with love. "Forever and always, my love." As they left her room, Darren and Maya held each other close, feeling the warmth of their shared journey. They knew that Greenfield was still learning, still growing, and that there would be more challenges along the way. But they were no longer afraid. They had found strength in each other, in their friends, and in the community they were helping to shape. They had started with small steps, with conversations and courage, and in doing so, they had helped Greenfield become a place where everyone, no matter their background or appearance, could belong. And in that moment, as the quiet peace of their home surrounded them, they felt a sense of belonging unlike any they had known before, a deep, abiding connection to a town they had once thought might never change. Strength and unity. Winter settled over Greenfield with a gentle snowfall, blanketing the town in a soft, sparkling layer of white. The season's festivities continued, each event drawing people together in ways that felt new, like Greenfield itself was embracing a fresh start. For Darren, Maya, and Lily, the town had slowly become a place they could call home, where they no longer felt like strangers walking along familiar streets. One evening, as the family gathered by the fireplace, Lily brought out the snowflake ornament she bought at the holiday fair. She examined it, turning it in the firelight as its edges caught the glow. Darren watched her, his heart swelling with pride and tenderness. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to make beautiful things like this snowflake," she said, her voice filled with an innocent resolve. Darren knelt beside her, looking into her bright eyes. "You already make the world beautiful, Lily, and whatever you decide to do, we'll always be here to cheer you on." As they decorated their tree, they exchanged stories of past holidays, and Lily laughed at tales of Darren's childhood Christmases, where he would sneak downstairs at night, trying to catch a glimpse of Santa. The family's laughter filled the room, weaving a sense of warmth and togetherness that seemed to echo through their home. The next day, Maya received an unexpected call from Carla. The community center was hosting a meeting to discuss how the town could continue its efforts toward inclusivity in the new year. Carla explained that, given the momentum Greenfield had gained, the center hoped to turn the winter fair into an annual event celebrating diversity and family unity. They wanted Maya and Darren's input on the event planning, recognizing their role in sparking this change. Later that week, Darren and Maya attended the meeting, held in a cozy room at the community center. Carla, Tricia, and several other members of the community group greeted them warmly. As they took their seats, Darren noted how the group included people from all walks of life, young and old, reflecting the very diversity they sought to celebrate. Carla began the meeting with a smile. "Thank you all for coming. As we know, this year has brought Greenfield face-to-face with change, and while it hasn't always been easy, it's been necessary. We have a chance now to create something lasting for our community, a tradition that reflects who we are and where we're headed." The group discussed ideas, from cultural performances and storytelling events to family potlucks where each family could share dishes that reflected their heritage. They brainstormed ways to involve everyone, creating spaces where people could learn from one another, bridging differences with shared experiences. Tricia proposed an idea she had been quietly mulling over. What if we had a community unity day at the end of winter? A day where we can showcase the talents and cultures that make Greenfield unique. It could become something that brings us together year after year. The group murmured in agreement, and Darren felt a surge of excitement. The idea of Community Unity Day seemed perfect, a symbol of Greenfield's journey, a celebration of everything they had accomplished, and a reminder of the work that lay ahead. Carla nodded thoughtfully. "That's a wonderful idea, Tricia. And we could also include educational booths, where people can learn about different cultures and histories. I think it's important to make it a day for everyone, from the youngest to the oldest." Maya leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Maybe we could have an activity area for the kids too, with crafts and storytelling. It could help teach them about inclusivity in a way that's fun and engaging." As the group continued planning, Darren found himself envisioning the event. The children's laughter, the tables filled with food from different cultures, the stories and music blending into one harmonious celebration. He felt a profound gratitude for the community they had found and the friendships that had grown from their shared journey. After the meeting, Carla approached them, her face thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come. This isn't the same town I moved to all those years ago. I think it's better now, stronger. And that's because of families like yours." Maya smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you, Carla. We're grateful to be here, to be part of this. We just want to make sure Lily grows up in a place that's safe, loving, and open-minded." Carla nodded, glancing around the room at the diverse faces deep in conversation. "I think we're building that place, one step at a time." As winter drew to a close, preparations for Community Unity Day were in full swing. Word of the event had spread throughout Greenfield, and while many residents were supportive, others remained skeptical. But the organizers remained undeterred, pouring their energy into making the event a success. Lily was particularly excited about the craft booth, where she would teach other children how to make paper snowflakes. She had spent days practicing at home, filling the kitchen table with her creations, each one more intricate than the last. Darren watched her with pride, marveling at her enthusiasm and creativity. The day before the event, a winter storm swept through Greenfield, covering the town in a thick layer of snow. As Darren shoveled their driveway, he wondered if the weather might dampen the turnout, but he knew that even a storm couldn't dim the community spirit. The morning of Community Unity Day dawned clear and bright, the sun glistening off the snow-covered trees. People bundled up in warm coats and scarves made their way to the community center, drawn by the promise of unity and celebration. Inside, the center buzzed with activity, each room filled with booths, decorations, and the aroma of food from every corner of the world. Darren and Maya arrived early with Lily, helping set up the craft area. As people began to arrive, Lily eagerly took charge of her snowflake booth, showing each child how to fold and cut the paper. Darren watched as the children gathered around her, laughing and admiring each other's creations. The main hall was transformed into a vibrant tapestry of cultures, with tables displaying colorful textiles, artwork, and artifacts. Music filled the air, blending with the hum of voices as people shared stories and memories, learning from one another's experiences. Tricia had organized a storytelling corner where members of the community could share personal stories about their families, their cultures, and their journeys. When it was Darren's turn to speak, he stood before the crowd, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and pride. He took a deep breath, looking out at the familiar faces of those who had supported him and Maya since the beginning. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began. "It means more than words can say. My family and I came to Greenfield hoping to find a community where we could belong. And though we faced challenges, the kindness and acceptance we found have shown us that Greenfield is a place of strength and resilience." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "This town has taught me that acceptance isn't a destination. It's a journey, one that we take together. Today is a celebration of that journey, of the unity we've created and the love that binds us." The crowd erupted in applause, and Darren felt a swell of gratitude wash over him. He looked over at Maya, who was smiling through tears, and at Lily, who beamed up at him, her face filled with pride. As the event continued, Tricia spotted Owen standing in the back, his arms crossed and his expression guarded. She walked over to him, sensing that he was on the verge of leaving. "Owen," she said gently, "I know this isn't easy for you, but I hope you'll stay and see what Greenfield has become. This is still your town too. We're all part of it." Owen hesitated, his gaze shifting to the families laughing and talking together, the children running around with snowflakes in hand. For the first time, he looked less certain, as though the sight had stirred something within him that he couldn't ignore. After a long pause, he nodded. "Maybe you're right, Tricia. Maybe I could try." Tricia smiled, her heart lifting with hope. She knew it wouldn't be an overnight transformation, but Owen's small step was a testament to the power of patience and understanding. As the day drew to a close, the community center's walls were lined with paper snowflakes, each one unique, just like the families who had gathered to celebrate. Darren, Maya, and Lily walked home together, their hearts full, knowing that this was more than just an event. It was the beginning of a legacy. That night, as they sat by the fireplace, Lily crawled into Darren's lap, resting her head on his shoulder. "Daddy, did we make Greenfield a happy place today?" Darren held her close, his voice a gentle whisper. "Yes, sweetheart. Today we made it better than ever. And we'll keep making it better, one step at a time." Maya leaned against him, her hand resting on his. "We did this together. And we'll keep going, for Lily and for everyone who calls Greenfield home." They sat together in the quiet peace of their home, knowing that they had found something truly special. Greenfield wasn't perfect, and it still had a long way to go. But for the first time, it felt like a place where everyone could belong, where love and acceptance could overcome even the deepest divides. As they drifted off to sleep that night, they dreamed of the future, of the legacy they were building, one moment, one family, one community at a time. Greenfield was theirs, a place of unity, strength, and unbreakable bonds. And they knew, deep in their hearts, that they would protect it, cherish it, and watch it grow for generations to come.